And then, so then they took a vote. No, wait, say that again? They took a vote? I don't believe you. They took a vote, but that has never, ever happened before. Never, ever. Wow. Yeah, okay. Bye. July 30th, 1943. This week, a major political development hits the headlines and shocks the world. This week, Benito Mussolini falls from power. And now, a word from our sponsors.
More taste, smoother on the throat. Better smoke. Join the Time Ghost Army.
I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Soviet counterattack north of Kursk continued to gain ground, and new Soviet offensives in the Donbass did as well. A Japanese counterattack on New Georgia failed, and the Allied invasion of Sicily continued its advances across the island. U.S. 7th Army's Provisional Corps is mopping up the west of the island after the capture of Palermo last week, and 2nd Corps has cut the northern coast road and will now turn east. They are under Allied Army Group Commander Harold Alexander's orders to head for Messina along 2 axes. As for Bernard Montgomery's British 8th Army, most of this week he's just gathering his forces for an attack to begin next week. Adrano is the next objective, since taking this would split the enemy forces to either side of Mount Etna. The Canadians on his left are still moving this week though, and by the 29th they've reached Agria on Route 121, and that's under 30 kilometers west of Adrano. The British 78th Division also takes Catena Nuova the night of the 29th, but really, they're all just gearing up for next week. Also on the 29th, Luftwaffe boss Smiling Albert Kesselring tells Adolf Hitler that the likely outcome of all of this seems like it will be an Axis evacuation from Messina. And he tells him he could do it in 3 days. But let me back up a few days, because the overall Italian situation has changed dramatically. On July 24th, and long into the night, the members of Italy's fascist Grand Council meet. See, with the invasion of Sicily, the bombing of Rome last week, and Mussolini's failure to speak up about getting Italy out of the war when meeting with Hitler last week, there are those who wish to remove Mussolini from power. Mussolini is aware of this. He begins the meeting with a talk about Comando Supremo and then a summary of the recent war. Dino Grandi, who lost his post as Minister of Grace and Justice in February for his loud and increasing criticism of the war, then presents his order of the day to the council. This calls for the restoration of pre-fascist institutions and for the king to assume supreme military and civil power. This would basically be the end of not only Mussolini's rule, but also fascism and participation in the war. Well, Grandi also presents a pretty scathing speech. He then calls for a vote on the order. If you think that sounds strange, then you're right. This is the first time the Fascist Grand Council has ever voted on anything. They are anti-parliamentary. At 2 a.m., the order passes 19-8, and Benito Mussolini is out of his job after nearly 21 years at the helm. Well, to summarize what happens next, the king gets the news and also decides to have Mussolini arrested. This happens at 5 p.m. the 25th. Marshal Pietro Badoglio is called upon to create a new government. The reaction on the streets of Rome was an exuberant outpouring of gratitude to the king, owing to the assumption that Italy would finally be free of this unpopular war. Unfortunately, neither the king nor Comando Supremo had made any firm decisions about how best to extricate Italy from the Berlin-Rome alliance. Interestingly enough, on the 25th, before learning of this, Hitler already decides to send 8 army divisions and 3 Waffen-SS divisions to Italy. Hitler and German command are then taken by surprise by the events of the day. But they understand a Badoglio government may well portend an imminent Italian defection from the war, which would threaten the Wehrmacht in southern Europe. German units will soon cross the Alpine passes and occupy southern Tyrol. They will cross in the Piedmont and the Julian Alps. A variety of plans are also suddenly really in the works to occupy Italy and the Balkans, to free Mussolini, to capture the Italian fleet, a bunch of stuff. In Italy, after a day of Italian celebrations, a curfew is called, and on the 27th, Badoglio's Council of Ministers meets for the first time. They decide to move Mussolini to an island and to dissolve the fascist party. The immediate tactical outcome of the coup was a weakening of Hitler's resolve to hold Sicily in favor of reinforcing Wehrmacht strength in metropolitan Italy to deal with future contingencies. Well, as I said, Kesselring is thinking about evacuation, and he is not planning on repeating the Tunisian debacle. As for the Allied reaction, the combined chiefs of staff haven't really made any concrete plans for what to do after Sicily because they didn't know whether the Italians would fight or not. Since they haven't fought that well, and with Mussolini out, they figure resistance will lessen in general, so they activate plans to attack mainland Italy. Operation Baytown, a British landing on the Boot, will be followed by Operation Avalanche, a landing at Salerno. But those are in the future, and there is a current operation going on, Operation Kutuzov, in the Soviet Union. Pavel Belov's 61st Army reaches the outskirts of Bolkhov the 25th, but by then Gruppe Harpe has armor ringing the town. The Soviets reinforce, however, and German commander Walter Model soon enough realizes that he needs to abandon Bolkhov and try to hold on to Orel. Meanwhile, Pavel Rybalko's 3rd Guards Tank Army arrives in this theater, and their initial advances are 20 kilometers a day. But Front Commander Markian Popov splits their armor into 2 separate axes. So while they are advancing on Orel along a broad front, they don't have the concentrated force to make a breakthrough. So then, Popov moves the entire Tank Guards army into 62nd Army's sector to attack southeast of Orel, together with Konstantin Rokossovsky's Central Front forces. This they do the 26th, finally attacking with 2 fronts against one part of the German lines. Rybalko's attacks don't go anywhere, but Rokossovsky's do, and the enemy is pushed back. Model manages to stabilize the front around Orel, but Popov's forces have taken a real beating, and Rybalko has lost 669 tanks in a week of fighting and has to be pulled out to refit. From this point on, the Germans had regained a continuous front all around the Orel salient, and the Soviet armies began pressing in from all sides. Model was able to inflict heavy losses upon the Soviet units closing in upon Orel, but even though he now had 8 of the German army's 16 panzer divisions, he could not stop them, nor could he stop the endless barrage of artillery and airstrikes that hammered his retreating forces. Model's priority now shifted to saving as much as possible, particularly the 20,000 German wounded in Orel's hospitals and the 53,000 tons of supplies in its depots. In order for that to happen, though, the Orel salient really does have to be evacuated, and the official order to do so comes the 28th. Now, all of that fighting I just talked about is not even the main Soviet counteroffensive. That is Operation Rumyantsev, with the goal of destroying the 4th Panzer Army and Gruppe Kempf further south, and it is soon to come. It hopes to even also cut off the 6th Army and the 1st Panzer Army and reach the Black Sea. Joseph Stalin wanted to launch this already the 23rd, but cooler heads convince him that the Voronezh and steppe fronts need real refitting to be in any condition to launch an offensive until likely next week. The other attacks the Soviets began last week on the northern Donets near Izium and on the Mius River continue this week though. They are to draw off Axis forces in preparation for Rumyantsev. The Izium one ends this week on the 27th, but Stavka is also doing another deception by the Voronezh front, who are going to soon launch Rumyantsev. See, they want to convince the enemy that their attack will not be coming from the southeast of the Kursk salient, but the southwest. So near Suja, they've built dummy positions and have set up radio traffic to imply that there's a tank army and a few tank corps concentrating here. They really get this going the 26th, and it continues into next week. Something interesting I read in Glanzenhaus's The Battle of Kursk. In order to bring up armor secretly for the real offensive, Soviet engineers have built 22 underwater bridges over the northern Donets and its tributaries. This deception was particularly necessary because of the extreme weakness of the attacking units, most of which had just finished the bitter defensive Battle of Kursk. The rifle regiments of the Red Army were asked to launch an offensive with only a skeleton of their authorized troops and equipment. Yet Stalin and Vatutin had taken a calculated risk, arguing that a rapid offensive would find the Germans even weaker than the Soviets. Erich von Manstein has argued several times in the past for the Axis abandoning the Donbass altogether, believing that maintaining force so far east just invited Soviet attacks. But Hitler has always rejected this, citing the need for the area's rich resources. And he now wants Manstein to use forces from Operation Citadel to restore the defensive lines in the south to what they were before last week. Manstein says, okay, and wants to hit the Izium bridgehead first. But to his frustration, Hitler again interferes and says, nope, prioritize the Mius River one. Manstein complains to Army Chief of Staff Kurt Zeitzler, reminding him about both Stalingrad and Manstein's counteroffensive and Hitler's meddling. Any analysis of the winter fighting demonstrated the truth of Manstein's points. Hitler had made a catastrophic strategic blunder at Stalingrad, and his constant interference in the fighting that followed was almost always detrimental, whereas Manstein's command had fought a campaign of astonishing virtuosity in the most adverse conditions imaginable. Zeitzler is sympathetic, but can't do much with Hitler. And that book, Retribution, goes on to explain there is a mismatch between the strategic goal of holding on to all the territory taken and the resources available. Hitler's arguments about the economic and industrial importance of the Donbass region were at the heart of the matter, but for precisely the opposite reasons Hitler believed. If control of these resources was so critical, then the war could no longer be won, as it was militarily impossible to retain control of the region in anything but the short term. Well, Manstein's Mius assault begins today, the 30th. He's got 2 Panzer divisions, 2 SS divisions, and 1 Panzer Grenadier division. But the attacks today achieve only mixed results. Soviet 56th Army attacks further down in the Kuban continue this week. They make a big attack the 26th with 80 tanks and waves of infantry, but they still do not manage to break the Axis lines. A side attack does push back the Romanians on the right flank, but the breach is quickly sealed, and for the week, Soviet gains are minimal. The Allied New Georgia campaign is renewed this week, and they've been reinforced with tanks, planes, and artillery. They're trying to fight their way to the Japanese Munda airfield, but the jungle mud and the fanaticism with which General Sasaki's troops defended their positions ensured that the American crawl toward the airstrip was slow and bloody. The defenders had to be pried out of each of their cleverly camouflaged pillboxes with tanks and flamethrowers. This battle involves taking apart the fortress one strong point at a time, and it is excruciating. The 25th, the attacks begin after a preparatory barrage. Destroyers firing 5-inch shells, heavy artillery, and 254 planes provide a pretty heavy weight of firepower, but they don't actually do all that much damage. The 37th Division makes no progress when it tries to advance, and the 43rd just a little progress in the center. On the 26th, the Americans use flamethrowers for the first time and send in light tanks as well. But on a front of just 600 meters, they run up against 74 enemy pillboxes. They keep grinding away though, and it does begin to tell by the end of the week. In fact, today, Sasaki orders a retreat to north of the airfield. We will see how all that goes next week. Something that begins this week, I need to mention, which is not actual armies fighting, is Operation Gomorrah, the firebombing of Hamburg. This is covered in much more detail on our War Against Humanity series, but I will touch on it here. On the 24th, it begins. It continues for 8 days and 7 nights, and is so far the heaviest aerial assault in history. The 27th, nearly 800 planes arrive, and the incendiary bombing creates a firestorm with winds of up to 240 kilometers per hour and temperatures of over 800 degrees Celsius. That's 1470 Fahrenheit. This burns more than 20 kilometers of the city, and even the asphalt of the streets melts. Just this night, over 18,000 people are killed. Many of them die in air raid shelters because the fire consumes all the oxygen above, leaving none to breathe below. Overall, in the raids, which end next week, between 30 and 40,000 people die. 60% of the city's housing is either damaged or destroyed, and 1 million people evacuate Hamburg. And with those sobering numbers, the week comes to an end. with bloody fighting on New Georgia and in the Soviet Union, and continued Allied advances in Sicily. But there is still one news item that stands out: the fall of Mussolini and the end of fascism in Italy. Well, the end of the fascist party, and the end of fascism if they do bring back the earlier government and civil institutions. This is a huge deal. Just the propaganda value alone, the prospect of Italy and its 80-something divisions leaving the war. For Germany to continue should that happen, Hitler will have to stretch his forces ever further to deal with both the Allies in Italy and the Soviets. And the Allies are, as we know, planning to invade France as well next spring. You know how they say 1 ounce of gold can be hammered thin enough to cover a football field? Unfortunately for Hitler, German soldiers are not made of gold. And neither are we, which is why we need the Time Ghost Army, so we can cover this sprawling, massive war. These are the newest officers, and Asani Onyx is Time Ghost Army Member of the Week. You too can join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com and be part of our odyssey. And you can watch our Between Two Wars episode about the rise of Mussolini and Italian fascism right here. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.